We have, believe it or not, everybody, 56 days until the general election, 21 days until the first debate, and early voting underway in a number of states. A new national poll from CBS News YouGov showing Joe Biden with a double-digit lead over President Trump, 52 to 42%. A look at Wisconsin now. The latest Morning Consult daily tracking poll of likely voters there shows Joe Biden up 8 points over President Trump, 51 to 43%. The latest Rasmussen poll shows identical numbers in that state. And the CBS News YouGov poll has Biden with a 6-point lead over President Trump in Wisconsin, 50 to 44%. That 6-point lead is the same as it was prior to the start of the unrest in Kenosha. And more voters in Wisconsin are siding with Joe Biden when it comes to those protests. 45% of Wisconsin registered voters approve of the president's handling of the nationwide protests. 55% disapprove. 51% approve of Biden's handling of the protests. 49% disapprove. When asked which candidate would make them feel more safe, 45% said the former vice president, while 43% said the current president. A statistical tie within the poll's margin of error. Now let's look at the polls nationally. In the latest CBS News YouGov poll, 44% approve of President Trump's handling of the nationwide protests. 56% do not, whereas 51% approve of Joe Biden's handling of the protests, 48% disapprove. And in the latest ABC News Ipsos poll, 59% think Biden would do a better job with handling the nationwide protests. 39% think President Trump would. 59% also say Biden would do a better job reducing violence in the country. So a lot of different polls to look at nationally, and also those Wisconsin numbers, too.
Yeah, the Wisconsin numbers, obviously, so many people looking at Wisconsin because, to paraphrase Tim Russert, the late, great Tim Russert, if 2000 was about Florida, then many believed 2020 would be about Wisconsin. But John Heilemann, it looks like all of Donald Trump's efforts to stir up racial animus in Wisconsin, to run an us versus them campaign in Wisconsin, to somehow get closer to Joe Biden in Wisconsin, have failed. He's down, as we see, 10 nationally, so it hasn't moved the meter nationally. But in Wisconsin, the last two polls that came out yesterday have him down 8 points. I wonder if we file this under another failed experiment by this White House to preach a racist brand of law and order that has fallen on deaf ears.
Yeah, Joe, you know, I was in Wisconsin all last week, so I feel like in addition to seeing the data that's been coming in that state ever since the situation unfolded in Kenosha on the initial shooting of Jacob Blake and then Kyle Rittenhouse afterwards, I sort of feel like I'm kind of tuned in on this story and was there last week when Trump was there and when Biden was there and talking to a lot of people. And I think the numbers, I haven't met anybody who knows anything about politics in Wisconsin who thinks that Joe Biden's going to win that state by 8 points on Election Day. Not a single person. But I do think that what the numbers reflect, to your point, is that after all of that convulsion around the outburst, again, as I said, the shooting of Jacob Blake, the protests, the riots, the burning, the two candidates coming there and making it ground zero last week, not much has fundamentally changed, not just since then, but since the two conventions. If you go back and look at the polling in Wisconsin all year, you've had basically Joe Biden at that like a high single-digit lead. Everyone who's there, Republican experts, Democratic experts, assumes that we're going to end up Donald Trump won the state by 22,000 votes in 2016, that the thing's going to tighten and it's going to be a couple points of a race. But what I think we've learned from this last week, and what I found really from the ground, what I kept hearing over and over again was that Joe Biden and Donald Trump both came to Kenosha. Donald Trump came and looked at the destruction, looked at the burned buildings, talked about riots. Joe Biden came and met with the community, talked to Jacob Blake's family, And a lot of people were very tuned into the fact that before Donald Trump came to Kenosha, he would not do what Joe Biden had done, which was to condemn violence on both sides. And people saw that speech the night before, the press conference the night before Trump came to Kenosha, when he refused, not only did he refuse to denounce Kyle Rittenhouse and the vigilantism there, but he defended him. And that, coupled with the way Trump conducted himself on the ground in Kenosha, which was seen throughout the state, the compare and contrast between Trump and Biden, Trump is seen as a force of division among voters in the middle of the electorate in Wisconsin. And I think that is one of the reasons that there's a ceiling on his ability to pull close, to tighten this race up in that state and a lot of other battleground states. The same dynamic is in play when it comes to these protests and racial justice and police violence.
Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.